Hey everyone, welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we are about to wrap up 2 Timothy. With today's is Paul's final words. So we're going to do Paul's final words today. And then tomorrow we'll do Paul's final greetings. He does a few final greetings. And then that will be the end of 2 Timothy. And that will be all of the letters and the last that we hear from Paul. The only thing we know after that, or after this, is that he was executed by Nero in Rome. And so we see the life that he lived and what happens because of that. But and like as we read through this, it does seem there's some sadness in it, like especially knowing the context. Like you can kind of hear a little bit of it behind the words that we see. But let's go through this and then we'll look at some of the notes. 2 Timothy 4:9-18. Timothy, please come as soon as you can. Demas has deserted me because he loves the things of this life and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus has gone to Dalmatia, I think is how you say that. Only Luke is with me. Bring Mark with you when you come, for he will be helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus, where when you come, be sure to bring the coat I left with Carpus at Troas. Also bring my books and especially my papers. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm, but the Lord will judge him for what he has done. Be careful of him, for he fought against everything we said. The first time I was brought before the judge, no one came with me. Everyone abandoned me. May it not be counted against them. But the Lord stood with me and gave me strength so that I might preach the good news in its entirety for all the Gentiles to hear. And he rescued me from certain death. Yes, and the Lord will deliver me from every evil attack and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. All glory to God forever and ever. Amen. And so Paul, right, he makes explicit his summons for Timothy, right? He's like, come to Rome, come quickly, right? I need you to come here. I think Paul knew that his ministry and his life was coming to an end. Um, Several people deserted him. Demas, he loved the things of this life, which was with contrast to the anticipation of Christ's glorious return. But he couldn't. Demas couldn't see beyond that. Luke, right, which is the author. We've read through the book of Luke and the book of Acts, and he was, as we've talked about, he accompanied Paul in his journeys at various times. It is often supposed that Luke was with Paul as his physician. There's a lot of evidence that seems we know Luke was a doctor, so there's probably a good possibility that Luke followed around, was with Paul as his physician, because we do know there were some health concerns that Paul had as well. Luke was the only one of Paul's co-workers who was continuously present with him, who stayed with him. And then we see Mark, or John Mark, right? And Paul's assessment that he would be helpful to him tells a story of forgiveness and redemption. If you remember early on in Acts, during one of Paul's missionary journeys, John Mark abandoned him. And then earlier on, or later on, whenever John Mark wanted to go again, Paul refused. And so they went separate ways. And so it's good to see now that Paul is saying, hey, John Mark's going to be helpful in my ministry. And so we see that reconciliation there. And so that's good to see. Tychicus was apparently a Greek from Asia Minor. He was probably going to Ephesus to deliver the present letter and take over for Timothy. That's just, again, we don't know that for sure, but that's just kind of the assumption. But what we see, Paul's arrest and transfer to Rome probably didn't allow him to gather his things, so that's why he requests that he get his coat and his books and letters. And then he transitions and talks about Alexander the coppersmith, and it's more than likely this was probably the same first person from First Timothy that we see in First Timothy 1:20. He did him much harm, and apparently he did more than oppose his teaching. And some scholars, or a lot of scholars, believe that he had a hand probably in Paul's arrest, and getting him arrested. And so we've got to be careful. Unfortunately, there's people like this in the church, right? That will, that we can see here. He opposed Paul so much that he went against him, and he did things to hurt him, and obviously get him arrested. And so I've seen this before. I've seen it because of jealousy and because of things like that. People, or power, control, whatever it is, whatever, I'm not sure what the coppersmith's opposition to Paul was. Maybe it was money, but I've seen that happen where Christians or those who call themselves Christians will turn on other Christians in order to maintain power, maintain status, maintain a lot of things, and do a lot of harm to people. I've experienced that myself, and it's hurtful. But Paul, he just kind of goes on and explains what happened, but doesn't wish any ill will. And that's the same attitude we have to have. We need to oppose false teaching. We need to oppose things like that. But we have to understand too, especially if you're truly following after God and trying to do what He asks you to do the best, then people are going to oppose that. Even people in the church, unfortunately, right? And because the devil likes to set up work in the church, and so sometimes you're going to run into that as well. And so we've just got to learn how to navigate that, learn how to work through that. And it's hard, right? It really is hard, because you feel betrayed. You feel like someone or something or someone who you thought was a friend or that kind of stuff turns around and stabs you in the back, right? That hurts. And so, but you have to learn to forgive. You have to learn to move on, and that's what Paul's done here. And so he then goes on to talk about, after that, he transitions to talking about the first time I was brought before a judge. And in a Roman trial, right, they were divided into three or multiple parts, right? You had the preliminary investigation, and you had the trial proper. Now, not too different than what we kind of do in America today. Um, and so Paul was probably referring to the first part of this, where the initial hearing, more than likely. And so he was able to use that to preach the good news. And so Paul turns his defense in court into to a proclamation of Jesus, to a proclamation of the good news, which is, if we've read, we reread through Acts and ever several letters where Paul talks about where he's done that, right? Where he would before the council, before a group of judges, and he would be the one, he would profess Christ and preach Christ. And so and he said he would do this for all the Gentiles to hear. Now, this could be him talking about all the Gentiles in the court to hear, or this could be a Paul transitioning to that he has sensed that he's completed his task, right? That he has gone out and has preached to all the Gentiles. I mean, and if you look at his ministry, obviously he hadn't preached to every single one of them, but his ministry has reached most of the Gentile world. And so we see that he had, there's a sense here that it seems like he has completed his task. And then he talks about being, from saved from certain death, or the literal translation here in the Greek is from the mouth of a lion. And so the lion is often a metaphor for enemies. We see that, but here, because of the way that the Romans would kill a lot of Christians, it may be literal. It may be literal lions in the amphitheater. That was common for them to do that. And so that's something that we see here. So when he says he was saved from certain death, now this could mean that he was saved from the enemies of God and enemies of Christ, or that he was saved from the literal lions of the amphitheater. We're not 100% sure on that, but again, both apply. But he pushes and continues and says God would continue to strengthen him, right, and keep him strong in the faith to the end of his life, and we see that he was. And again, like we said, it wasn't too long after this. We're not sure how many years or if it was months, but it wasn't too much longer after this that Paul was killed by Nero and the Romans in Rome. So again, I hope that you are learning from these. There's a lot that we see here. I know this portion, wrapping up Second Timothy, there's a sadness to it, but there's also a gladness to it too, because we see Paul, after many long years of working hard in the ministry, being constantly being arrested, being beaten, being persecuted, he finally gets to go to his reward. And so it's something that us as Christians that we should look forward to as well. And see when we come to the end of our road, we should hopefully can look back and say, look, I did my best. I worked hard for the Lord. I worked hard for his ministry. I tried to win as many people to Christ as I could. And so I hope that we see this as something, an example to follow, someone to be like as we go through this. So as always, I hope that y'all are learning from these. I hope that you pick something up as we go through these, that every single time. I know I do, and that's why I like doing this, and I like going through these. But I also encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. That way you can continue to follow along with us. And as always, more than anything, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these, and I hope that y'all have a wonderful day.